Rancher says hanged Apache leader. Thousands of warriors arrive next day. The land was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. The wide-open plains stretched far under the evening sky, painted with soft orange and fading blue. A single ranch stood alone in that vast space, surrounded by dry grass, wooden fences, and the slow sound of wind brushing the earth. This land belonged to a rancher named Thomas Hale, a man known for keeping to himself and working from sunrise to sunset without complaint. His life followed a simple pattern: care for the animals, repair what broke, and survive another day on the frontier. Thomas had learned long ago that the land did not care about a man's past or dreams. It only responded to effort. Every scar on his hands told a story of hard work, failed crops, sudden storms, and long winters. He was not rich, and he was not famous, but he was respected by the few settlers who lived miles away. He believed in fairness even when the world around him did not. That evening Thomas was riding along the far edge of his property, checking fences before night fully settled. The air felt strange, thicker than usual, as if the land itself was holding its breath. His horse slowed near a cluster of old trees that stood apart from the rest of the plain. Thomas rarely came this far unless something felt wrong. And something did. As he moved closer, he noticed marks in the dirt, footprints, many of them pressed deep into the ground. His grip tightened on the reins. Trouble had passed through here recently. Then he saw the tree. At first, he wished he had not. There was a man hanging there, tied by a rope that cut cruelly into his shoulders. His body was still, his head lowered. For a moment, Thomas thought it was too late. His heart sank, and he felt anger rise. Anger at whoever had done this and left the man to die like a warning sign. Thomas dismounted slowly, every step careful. As he came closer, he noticed something important. The man was breathing. Barely, but breathing. His chest moved in shallow, uneven rises. His face was bruised, and his clothes were torn. But there was strength in his posture, even in suffering. Thomas recognized him immediately. He was an Apache leader. Fear struck Thomas like cold water. Helping this man was not a simple act. It was dangerous. Everyone knew the stories of clashes, revenge, and long-standing hatred. Settlers avoided trouble, and trouble often came anyway. Helping an Apache leader could bring consequences far worse than ignoring him. Thomas stepped back, his mind racing. He looked around, half expecting armed men to return. The land was empty, silent, watching him. He told himself to leave, to turn away. No one would blame him. Many would say it was wiser. But his eyes returned to the man's face. This was not just an enemy. This was a human being left to suffer. Thomas thought about his own past. Years ago, when he had arrived on this land, injured and nearly broken, no one had helped him at first. He remembered the pain of being left alone when survival depended on mercy. That memory burned stronger than fear. He sighed deeply, as if accepting a burden he could no longer avoid. Working quickly, Thomas climbed onto a nearby rock and reached for the rope. His hand shook, not from weakness, but from knowing the choice he was making. With careful movements, he loosened the knots and lowered the man gently to the ground. The Apache leader collapsed, gasping, coughing, pulling in air like a man returning from the edge. Thomas dragged him into the shade and gave him water from his canteen. The man drank slowly, eyes half open, studying Thomas with caution. There was pain in his gaze, but also alertness. He was not broken. Thomas spoke softly, more to himself than to the man. He said he meant no harm. Words felt small, but he offered them anyway. He cleaned the wounds as best he could and wrapped cloth around the injured areas. The sun dipped lower, and shadows grew long. For a moment, neither man spoke. Two worlds stood close together, divided by history, but connected by this single act. As night came, Thomas knew he could not leave the man here. He carefully lifted him onto his horse and walked beside them back to the ranch. Every sound made him tense. Every movement of the wind felt like a warning. But the night remained quiet. At the ranch, Thomas laid the Apache leader inside his barn, away from sight. He gave him food, more water, and rest. The man slept deeply, exhaustion pulling him under. Thomas stayed awake, sitting nearby, rifle within reach but heart uneasy. He wondered if he had just invited disaster into his life. Near dawn, the Apache leader woke. His eyes were clearer now. He struggled to sit, then steadied himself. He looked at Thomas for a long time as if trying to understand him. Thomas nodded once. He did not speak much. He believed actions mattered more. The Apache leader stood slowly. Though still weak, he carried himself with dignity. He said nothing, but he placed a hand over his heart briefly, a gesture of respect. Then he turned and walked into the early morning light, disappearing toward the distant hills. Thomas watched him go, feeling both relief and fear. He did not know what would come next. He only knew he had done what he believed was right. As the sun rose higher, the land returned to its quiet state, but the silence felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. Thomas returned to his work, though his hands moved slower than usual. His thoughts stayed fixed on the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, a story was being told, and whether it would bring peace or danger, he could not yet know. One simple act had been made, and its weight had not yet fallen. If you want, I can now expand part 2 in the same style and length, keeping everything engaging and safe. Just say the word. Morning light spread slowly across the ranch, but Thomas Hale did not feel its warmth. He stood near the barn doorway, watching the empty land where the Apache leader had disappeared hours earlier. The dust from his footsteps had already settled, leaving no clear sign he had ever been there. Still, Thomas felt certain that the land remembered, and so did he. Sleep had not come easily after the man left. Thomas had sat alone, listening to the sounds of night, replaying every moment in his mind. He wondered if he had done the right thing, or if he had made a mistake that would cost him his life. The choice had been made with his heart, not with careful planning. Now, all that remained was waiting. As the day began, Thomas forced himself back into routine. He fed the animals, repaired a broken fence post, and checked the water troughs. His body moved out of habit, but his thoughts wandered. Every distant sound made him pause. Every moving shadow pulled his eyes toward the horizon. The nearby settlers lived far apart, but news traveled fast in this land. By midday, Thomas rode toward the small trading post several miles away. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to understand the mood of the region. As he approached, he noticed tension in the air. Conversation stopped when he walked by. Eyes followed him. An older man named Caleb finally spoke to him near the supply shelves. Caleb had lived in the region longer than most, and had seen enough to know when trouble was coming. He leaned closer and spoke in a low voice. "Something happened last night," Caleb said. "Word is spreading. People say an Apache leader was left near the old trees." Thomas's chest tightened, but he kept his face calm. He nodded slightly, as if hearing this for the first time. "They say he survived," Caleb continued, "and someone helped him." A few men nearby pretended not to listen, but their attention was sharp. Caleb studied Thomas carefully. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Thomas met his eyes. He did not lie. He did not explain. He simply said, "I saw a man who needed help." "Then I hope Mercy remembers your name," he said, "because his people will." Thomas finished his business quickly and left. The ride back felt longer than usual. His thoughts raced ahead of him, imagining every possible outcome. He knew the Apache leader would return to his people. He knew the story would be told. What he did not know was how it would be understood. Back at the ranch, the afternoon dragged on. The sky was clear, too clear, as if nothing could possibly go wrong. Thomas repaired tools that did not need fixing and cleaned spaces already clean. He needed his hands busy to quiet his mind. As evening approached, he saw movement far in the distance. At first it was only dust, a thin line against the fading sky. Thomas climbed the small hill near his house and shaded his eyes. The dust grew thicker, wider. Something, or many somethings, were moving across the land. Fear rose in his chest, but he did not run. He watched. He counted heartbeats. The dust stopped far from the ranch and slowly faded as figures became clearer. People. A small group, not large, but enough to make his pulse quicken. They did not approach immediately. They waited. Thomas stood alone, the wind brushing past him. He understood then that this moment was connected to the one he had faced under the tree. This was the answer to his choice, though not the final one. After some time, one man stepped forward. It was the Apache leader. He walked slowly, but his strength had returned. His posture was upright, his expression calm but serious. He stopped at a respectful distance. Thomas walked forward to meet him, keeping his hands visible, his movements steady. They stood facing each other with only the open land between them. The Apache leader spoke first. His voice was low, steady, and clear. He thanked Thomas for saving his life. His words were simple but carried weight. He explained that his people believed life was a gift meant to be protected, even in times of conflict. What Thomas had done was not forgotten. Thomas listened carefully. He replied with honesty. He said he did not act for reward or favor. He said he could not watch a man suffer when he had the power to help. That was all. The Apache leader nodded. He said trust was rare between their worlds, but rare things were valuable. He said his people would not bring harm to a man who showed mercy without asking for anything in return. Then he said something that stayed with Thomas forever. One good action, he said, travels farther than fear. With that, he turned and walked back to his group. They left quietly, returning to the open plains. No threats were made, no promises demanded. Only respect remained in the air. That night, Thomas slept better than he had since the incident. But his rest was not free of dreams. He dreamed of long lines of people moving across the land, not with anger, but with purpose. He woke before dawn, unsure whether the dream was warning or reassurance. The following day, signs of change appeared. A group of travelers passed by without hostility. A nearby rancher waved instead of avoiding him. At the trading post, people spoke of peace more than danger. The story had spread, but it had taken on a new shape. Now, Thomas did not see himself as a hero. He returned to his routine, though he remained alert. He knew respect could be tested. He knew peace was fragile. But he also knew something important had shifted. Days passed, and the land stayed calm. Then, one morning, Thomas noticed something unusual near the edge of his property. A small bundle rested near the fence. He approached carefully. Inside were supplies, dried food, tools, and a finely crafted item meant to last a lifetime. No note was needed. Thomas understood. The Apache leader had kept his word. As he stood there, holding the bundle, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility. His choice had not ended with one life saved. It had created a path forward, one that others might follow. Far beyond the hills, voices were gathering, stories were being shared, and the land, once divided by fear, was slowly learning a new language, one built not on force, but on respect. But the quiet would not last forever. Something larger was already moving toward the horizon. The calm that followed felt unusual, almost unreal. The land looked the same as it always had, wide and open, quiet under the bright sky. Yet Thomas Hale could sense a change, like the air before a storm that had not yet shown its face. Every morning he woke earlier than usual and stepped outside, scanning the horizon before starting his work. He did not expect trouble, but he did not trust the silence either. Days passed and nothing happened. The animals grazed peacefully. The wind moved gently through the grass. Still, Thomas felt watched, not by eyes, but by fate. The simple act he had chosen under that tree had traveled farther than he could see. At the trading post, people spoke in low voices. Some looked at Thomas with curiosity, others with worry. A few avoided him altogether. Stories had grown, changing slightly each time they were told. Some said Thomas had made a dangerous enemy. Others said he had earned powerful respect. No one knew the truth, and fear filled the gaps that knowledge had not reached. Thomas did not defend himself, and he did not boast. He listened. He learned. And he waited. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and bright, a young ranch hand rode up to Thomas's property in a hurry. His horse was tired, foam at its mouth. The boy slid off the saddle, breathing hard. "They're talking," the boy said quickly. "People say a large gathering is forming beyond the hills. They don't know why, but they say it's big." Thomas felt his chest tighten. He thanked the boy and watched him ride away. Then he stood alone, the weight of those words pressing down on him. A large gathering could mean many things. Celebration, discussion, or something far more serious. Thomas knew better than to assume the worst, but he also knew better than to ignore signs. He prepared quietly. He secured his animals, checked his supplies, and made sure everything was in order. If something came, he would face it standing, not running. That night, sleep refused to stay with him. He sat on his porch, listening to the night sounds, watching the stars move slowly across the sky. Bah. He thought about the Apache leader, his calm eyes, his steady voice, his words about how one good action could travel farther than fear. Thomas hoped that was true. The next morning, the land woke early. Birds took flight in large numbers, lifting suddenly from the ground as if startled by something unseen. Thomas noticed it right away. Animals sensed changes long before people did. By mid-morning, he saw it. A long cloud of dust stretched across the horizon. It was far away but wide, too wide to be caused by a small group. Thomas climbed the hill near his house again, his heart beating faster with each step. From that height, the view was clear. The dust moved slowly but steadily, like a river of motion across the land. Thomas did not panic. He did not hide. He stood there, letting the truth settle in. Whatever was coming, this was the moment his choice had been leading toward. As the hours passed, the dust grew closer. Shapes formed within it. Many shapes. The ground seemed to hum softly beneath their movement. Thomas felt very small standing there, one man against a force that could change everything. Word spread quickly. Nearby settlers gathered at a distance, watching with fear in their eyes. Some prepared to leave. Others stayed, frozen by uncertainty. Whispers turned into prayers. No one knew what would happen next. Thomas returned to his ranch and waited. When the group finally came into clear view, the sight was overwhelming. The land before him filled with people, more than he had ever seen in one place. They moved with order, not chaos. Their presence was strong but controlled. They stopped far from the ranch, forming a wide, silent line across the plain. The air grew still. No one spoke, no one advanced. Thomas stepped forward alone. Every step felt heavy, but his back remained straight. He did not carry a weapon. He carried only the weight of his decision and the hope that it had been understood correctly. From the front of the gathered people, one figure moved ahead. It was the Apache leader. He rode calmly, his posture confident, his presence commanding without effort. He stopped several steps away from Thomas and looked at him with the same steady eyes as before. There was no anger in them, only purpose. The Apache leader raised a hand, and behind him the many people remained still. Silence spread like a held breath. He spoke loudly enough for all to hear. He told them what had happened. He told them how he had been left to fade away, how a man from another world had chosen to help him when no one else would. He spoke of water offered without question, shelter given without demand, and respect shown without expectation. As he spoke, Thomas felt the weight lift slightly from his chest. This was not a gathering of anger. This was a gathering of truth. The Apache leader said that his life had been spared by a single act of mercy, and because of that, his people had come, not to bring harm, but to show honor. A low murmur moved through the crowd, not threatening, but thoughtful. Faces turned toward Thomas. Thousands of eyes rested on him, not with hate, but with curiosity and recognition. He stood quietly, letting the moment unfold. He knew that words were less important now than presence. The Apache leader continued. He said that respect must be answered with respect, that kindness must not be met with fear. He said the land had seen enough division, enough pain, enough loss caused by misunderstanding. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped down from his horse and placed his hand over his heart, bowing his head slightly toward Thomas. The plain fell completely silent. Thomas felt emotion rise in his throat, but he held it back. He returned the gesture in his own way, nodding slowly, acknowledging the honor without trying to claim it. The Apache leader turned back to his people and raised his voice once more. He said that no harm would come to this land or this man, that the bond created by one good action would stand as long as memory remained. After that, the gathering began to shift. Slowly, calmly, the people turned away, moving back across the plains as one. There was no rush, no display of power, only unity and purpose. Dust rose again, but this time it did not feel threatening. It felt like closure. As the last figures disappeared into the distance, Thomas remained standing, alone once more. The land returned to its quiet state, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It felt earned. Nearby settlers emerged from their hiding places, stunned. Some approached Thomas cautiously, others from a distance. No one spoke right away. There were no words big enough for what they had witnessed. Later that evening, Thomas sat on his porch, the sky painted in deep reds and golds. He felt tired, but not afraid. He knew challenges would still come. Peace did not erase the past, and respect had to be maintained. But something important had been proven. A single choice, made in a moment of uncertainty, had shaped the path of many. And as night fell, Thomas understood that the story was not over yet. What had happened would travel far, carried by voices, memories, and the land itself. The next chapter would test whether the world was ready to learn from it. The days after the great gathering felt unreal, like the world had paused to catch its breath. The land was quiet again, but not empty. Thomas Hale could feel the change in every small detail. The way the wind moved through the grass, the way animals behaved, even the way the sky seemed wider than before. Life continued, but it did not feel the same. People began visiting Thomas's ranch more often. Some came with questions, others with silent curiosity. A few arrived just to see the place where everything had happened, as if the ground itself held answers. Thomas welcomed them politely, but did not exaggerate the story. He told it simply. the way it had unfolded without adding fear or pride. He did not want the moment to grow into something false. Still, the story traveled faster than he could control. Traders carried it to distant towns. Ranch hands repeated it around evening fires. With each retelling, it grew larger, but the heart of it stayed the same. A man had chosen mercy, and mercy had answered back. Not everyone was comforted by this. Some settlers worried that the calm would not last. They believed peace was fragile and easily broken. A few accused Thomas of risking everyone's safety. They said he had trusted too easily, that one good act could not erase years of conflict. Thomas listened to them without anger. He understood their fear. Fear had shaped this land for a long time, but he also knew that fear alone could not build a future. One afternoon, a small group of settlers gathered near the trading post to talk openly. Thomas was invited, though he did not ask to be. The discussion was tense but honest. People asked what would happen next. Would there be rules, boundaries, trust? He said no one could control what tomorrow would bring, but he believed that respect, once given and returned, created responsibility on both sides. He reminded them that nothing had been taken by force. No threats had been made. Only a message had been delivered. Some nodded. Others remained unsure. As weeks passed, signs of cooperation slowly appeared. Travelers crossed paths without panic. Supplies were exchanged fairly. Small gestures replaced suspicion. These moments were quiet and easy to miss, but Thomas noticed them. Change rarely arrived loudly. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Thomas noticed movement near the edge of his property. He felt alert but not afraid. A familiar figure approached on foot. It was the Apache leader again. This time he came with only a few companions, all unarmed. They stopped at a respectful distance, waiting. Thomas walked out to meet them, his steps steady, his mind clear. The Apache leader greeted him calmly. He explained that his people wished to maintain understanding, not just celebrate it once and forget it. He spoke of shared land, shared water, and shared responsibility. He said respect was not a single act, but a path that required care. Thomas agreed. He said peace could not survive without effort from everyone involved. He said mistakes would happen, but honesty could guide them through. They talked as the sky darkened, speaking simply, clearly, without raised voices. No promises were carved into stone, but intentions were shared. That was enough for now. Before leaving, the Apache leader offered Thomas a symbol, a reminder of trust. It was not valuable in a material sense, but it carried meaning. Thomas accepted it with humility, understanding its weight. After that visit, cooperation became more visible. Small groups began coordinating travel times to avoid misunderstandings. Shared signals were agreed upon. Word spread that this land was no longer guided by fear alone. Thomas found himself becoming an unplanned bridge between worlds. He did not seek leadership, but people came to him with concerns, questions, and ideas. He listened more than he spoke. He guided discussions toward fairness and calm. At times, the responsibility felt heavy. He missed the simplicity of his old routine. But he also understood that simplicity had been replaced by purpose. One night, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Thunder rolled and rain fell hard. Thomas worked through the night securing his animals. In the distance he saw lights moving, others doing the same. No one stood alone against the storm. The land reminded them all that nature did not choose sides. After the storm passed, the morning air felt fresh and clean. Damage had been done, but nothing could not be repaired. People helped each other without hesitation. The storm became another shared memory, another quiet bond. Still, not all challenges faded. There were moments of tension, misunderstandings that needed patience to untangle. Thomas learned that peace was not the absence of problems, but the willingness to face them together. Late one afternoon, a young boy approached Thomas's ranch. He had traveled far and looked tired. He carried news from distant settlements, some good, some uncertain. The story of what had happened here had reached far places. Some were inspired. Others were skeptical. Thomas thanked the boy and gave him food and water. As the boy rested, Thomas realized something important. The story was no longer his to control. It belonged to everyone who heard it. That night, Thomas sat alone, looking at the stars. He thought about the man he had been before, focused only on survival, cautious of everything beyond his fence. He was still that man in many ways, but he was also more. He understood now that courage did not always come from strength. Sometimes it came from choosing humanity when fear felt easier. The land around him remained vast and unpredictable. The future was still uncertain, but something strong had taken root. An understanding that people could choose a different path, even when history suggested otherwise. As the fire beside him burned low, Thomas felt calm. He knew there would be more tests ahead. Peace always attracted challenges, but he was ready. The next step would not be about one man or one moment. It would be about whether this fragile respect could survive the weight of time. And somewhere beyond the hills, eyes were watching, not with anger, but with expectation.